I'm Scott, and this is Great Scott Knitting Dyes Yarn, episode 16. Today I'm going to be dyeing one skein of Dyer Supplier 7525 Superwash Merino Nylon Fingering Yarn. This is a 3-ply yarn that at 100 grams comes in at about 415 yards. I love how this yarn knits up, and it takes dye really nicely. I'm going to be dyeing it with a combination of 3 different colors of food coloring as my dye. The first food coloring I'm going to be using is a neon blue that is part of just a generic store-bought food coloring that I just got at the grocery store. I'm also going to be using Wilton's Icing Violet, as well as Wilton's Icing Royal Blue as my different dyes that I'm applying to this yarn. What I'm going to be trying to go for is a sort of January winter feel of light blues, whites, maybe occasional dark blues of ice, and even violet, where maybe the sun is playing off of the blues that are captured in the ice. So that's kind of the inspiration that I'm going for. Let's see how it comes out. I am soaking my yarn in about 8 cups of tap water, and to that I've added 2 tablespoons of white vinegar as my acid. I'll let this soak for about 20 minutes. I'll pour off a little bit of the soak water before I put it on the stove and we get ready to dye. My dye pot has been on the stove for a little while, and the yarn is nice and steamy, and I'm going to go ahead and add my first application of dye, which is this really light blue. I'm just going to dump it randomly on top of the yarn. And I am going to mix this in just a little bit to give a more general coverage. There will be some darker patches there, as you can see, but moving the yarn around just a little bit will help that dye disperse into the water. Now, there is not a lot of pigment in this first application, so it is going to remain really pastel and light colored, which is one of the layers that I am really looking to go for. Because there's not much pigment, it won't take long to absorb, so I'm going to let this steep for about 10 minutes. It's been about 10 minutes, and I am now going to apply the violet. I chose to add it to the outside because some of those fibers were lighter than the rest of it, so I'm applying the violet color there. Because this is a little more pigmented, I'm going to let it sit for about 15 minutes. All right, we are now ready to add our third layer of color, which is this darker royal blue. So I'm just going to randomly add that in as well. I'm not removing any water as I add these additional layers, so the disbursement of the pigment is going to be greater. I'm going to let this go for about 20 minutes. And here I'm going to actually add a darker layer of that royal blue. I've added a little bit of black food coloring to give it sort of that deeper tone. And I'm not going to move this around at all. I'm just going to let this steep for about 20 or 30 minutes. And once that has done, I'll let the pot completely cool, and then we'll go towards the rinsing. So my yarn has completely cooled in my pot. I've gone ahead and pulled it out, and I'm ready to rinse. You can see that there are those light colors, the violet colors, some medium blues, and has a little bit of the darker tonality in there as well. My rinsing is intended to remove that vinegar acid from the fiber, as well as dislodge any unabsorbed dye that might be in the fiber as well. I mean, one of the biggest things that when you're dyeing your own yarn, the one thing you don't want to have happen is when you're knitting up a project, you don't want those colors to be bleeding at a point when you wash that project, especially if you're combining it with skeins of different colors. So there's just a hint of blue in this initial rinse. I'm going to add some clear dish soap. It's a really mild detergent. You could also use a standard wool wash or any other mild detergent of your choosing to help wash your yarn. Again, this helps remove the acid. And if your yarn is going to bleed, this often will get that bleeding happening. If you do have significant bleeding when you are washing your yarn, I've learned that one of the things you can do is if you've applied soap, go ahead and rinse the soap out and then put your yarn back into a acidic water bath, either with citric acid or vinegar. Let it soak, and probably about 20 to 30 minutes. You could even, if you are having really bad bleeding, you could even reheat it to reset the yarn in acid and heat, and then come back and continue your rinsing. But I'm not seeing any significant bleeding with this yarn, so I'm going to go ahead and finish rinsing out the soap. And once the water runs clear, I'll hang it to dry, and we'll come back and look at the dried finished product. So here is our dried skein of yarn. You can see that there are some lovely layers of tone and color, the different shades of blue, as well as those hints of violet that come in. It's a little deeper and darker than what I had originally had in mind. I'd actually kind of hoped that there might have been some white left behind, but that's not what happened. I probably could have gone without that last layer of darker color, but even though it's not hitting my imagined mark, I do like how it turned out. I think it's really beautiful. The different tones of blue and the violet do actually give me that feeling of a cold January wintry sky, with those different lighter, medium, and darker tones of blue, shades of violet. It does just give that feeling of cold and crisp feeling. So it may not have met my original intent, but it certainly gives me that feeling that I was going for with this particular colorway. Not to mention the fact I learned a few things as I did this experiment. A couple of things I think I might try for the next time that I dye using this method would be to potentially twist the yarn a couple of times, not into a heavy twist like what you see here, but just to turn it on itself a little bit more to create some light resist. I think the other key thing that might be important would be dyeing multiple skeins at the same time, so that the dye doesn't move around as much in your low immersion style, and the different skeins act sort of as a resist to each other, so the dye hits different areas at different rates. That, and actually, even though I'm letting the yarn fully set before I add a new color, I'm thinking maybe let it not completely clear the dye bath before adding the new shade, so that there's a bit more of a blend. I don't know, things to play around with and experiment with as I try to perfect this technique that I'm playing with. So we'll see. I hope you've enjoyed watching me dye this skein of yarn. I hope maybe even you learned something and are considering doing something like this for yourself. I highly recommend it because it is a lot of fun. It's a great way to spend an afternoon. In the end, you'll have a skein of yarn that is beautiful, that will make a really lovely project. You know, this could easily be a nice pair of socks, or it might be turned into a shawlette. I don't know. We'll see where it takes me. But let me just tell you, dyeing yarn in your own kitchen using food coloring and a little bit of vinegar and a heat source, so much fun. So much fun. I can't tell you how much having this new hobby has meant during this time where I've been stuck at home. If you do enjoy this, have enjoyed this video, please click like for this video. And if you enjoy the content you're seeing on this channel, click subscribe. If you click the little bell icon next to the subscribe button, you'll be given notifications as to when I upload new content. Again, give this a try. It is a lot of fun. It's very simple, relatively inexpensive, and gives you the opportunity to create the colors that you want instead of relying on somebody else. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your lovely day.